I'm going to start off with a statement. I want you to keep it in your minds. Last week, I was talking about the eyes of our heart and how that means that we consider things, we think about things, and then we apply it to our lives. It's the Jewish way of looking at the heart. So here's what I want to add to it today. The eyes of our heart set the direction of our life. Did you get that? The eyes of our heart set the direction of our life. Let me share with you a couple of readings. One from Lamentations, chapter 3, verse 21. I'm going to read it in two different translations so you really can capture the depth of what he's trying to convey. Yet this I call to mind, and therefore I have hope. Because of the Lord's great love, we're not consumed. For his compassion never fails. They are new every morning. Great is your faithfulness. The Living Bible puts it this way here. I still dare to hope when I remember this. The faithful love of the Lord never fails. His mercies never cease. They are new every morning. And then a familiar one from Proverbs chapter 3, verses 5 and 6. Trust in the Lord with all your heart, and do not lean on your own understanding, but in all your ways acknowledge him, and he will make your paths straight. Again, I want you to consider this maybe in a new fashion. The Jewish way of looking at it. You remember this was written by a Jewish individual many years ago. Trust in the Lord with all your heart. What does that mean then? Think about it. Do I trust in God? Why do I trust in God? And then apply it to what we would consider our heart. Trust in the Lord with all your heart. And then he goes on to say, don't lean on your understanding, but in all your ways acknowledge him, and he will make your paths straight. The eyes of our heart set the direction of our lives. Jude and I enjoy watching new, up-to-date movies like old westerns. Does anybody like old westerns? Oh, a few of us do. I'm glad you do. You know, when the actor is standing outside the dusty street, and he walks toward the hotel and the saloon, and he swings open the doors, and immediately you see the individuals walking into the hotel or the saloon, and they're carrying on the dialogue as if nothing's happened. Now I'm going to use a more modern analogy, but this still is a little bit dated. Han Solo is walking into his spacecraft, and he walks up the ramp, and immediately we catch him inside the spacecraft. And he's carrying on the dialogue as if nothing's ever happened. What we don't see and what we don't hear is the director calling, cut! And then they go into the studio to do the interior scene. I hope I'm not ruining watching movies in this experience for you. Because the reality is, what we saw on the outside when they were going in is nothing but a facade. I saw these movie sets down in the States where you go through this, what looks like a western town, and you see the buildings, and you see the hotel, and you see all of the other areas, but it's nothing more than a facade because there's nothing on the inside. And we can equate that to life. You see, this world wants to convince us that what we see is all there is. And they work very diligently to try to prove it so. The reality is that what we see is a mere facade. And that the reality is far greater than even what we can capture with our own eyes. The reality is this. behind the scenes, God is working on our behalf. He is intervening. He is taking care of things. He is helping us and others on a continual basis. And we need periodically to say to God, open the eyes of my heart that I can see you, so that I can believe you, especially when things are tough. The reality is God is alive and well and working all around us. But we need to have that faith to trust and believe in this truth. Let me give you this illustration from the Bible. In Genesis, we see how Abraham and Sarah had a servant girl, I'm going to call her. Her name was Hagar. And once Sarah had her first boy, she didn't want Hagar and this son in her home any longer. So she instructed Abraham to get them out. And there were reasons for that. But nonetheless, Abraham was very compassionate, because this was, after all, his son too. And before he acted, God gave him the assurances. God assured Abraham, I'll take care of them. And so Abraham then gave Hagar some water, some food, and sent them off into the desert of Beersheba. Well, eventually the food and the water were consumed. There was no more. They were alone in this desert environment. Hagar was upset, and she put the boy underneath a tree for shade, and she went off in the distance, and then she cried. And God intervened. He sends an angel. And so in chapter 3, verse 15, this is what we see. The angel comes to Hagar and says, what is the matter, Hagar? And then he says, don't be afraid. God has heard the boy crying as he lies there. Think about that for a second. God has heard this little boy's crying. There's all of these other problems going on. There's all these other people asking God for help. But the angel says, God has heard the boy cry. That's how much he cares. And it's almost like a father's heart, isn't it? Or a mother's heart, for that matter. You know, a little child cries, and our heart is drawn to that child, right? And we want to respond, and we want to meet the needs. And here we see this heart of God. He's heard the boy crying, but here's the thing. Now I'm going to go on. What does the angel continue to say? In verse 19. Then God opens the eyes of who? Of Hagar. And what did she see? She saw a well of water. You see, God said to Abraham, don't worry, I'm going to take care of them. And God knows where they're going to be when they run out of water, when they run out of food. And God has already made available a well of water. But she doesn't see it. And so God opens her eyes so that she can see. And it says, she went and filled up the skin with water and gave the boy a drink. So here we see it very clearly. God is there all along. God has made a promise to Abraham, and he keeps his word. The power of a promise and the power of keeping our promises. God takes care of them. And then God opens up their eyes so that they can see his provisions. If we today allow God to open up the eyes of our heart, we will see how he is working all around us. God, open up our eyes. Enable us to see beyond the sadness, beyond the pain, beyond the grief, beyond the problems, beyond even the despair, that we may see how you are making available your help for us today. I want to talk talk to you a little bit about now some paradox. You know what a paradox is, right? It's a pair of dogs. We had Judy's brother up last fall. He came to visit us. Now I want you to picture this, okay? This is Lake Winnipeg. We all know Lake Winnipeg is a calm, sedate lake. He comes up to visit us and he says to us, "You should put your dock right there." And I laughed. Can you understand why? And Judy's other brother laughs and he goes, "What's wrong with that?" And I said, "You have no idea what Lake Winnipeg is like, right?" Yeah. You wouldn't even put a paradox up because it wouldn't work for you. So it is kind of a paradox when you think about it. You have a beautiful lake, but you can't put a dock up, so it's a paradox. That's what it is. Something that doesn't make sense when we present this. Let me give you a couple of examples. Do you mind? Matthew chapter 5. You have your Bibles, open it up to the Sermon on the Mount. The Sermon on the Mount, okay, Jesus is giving us the heavenly perspective. He's helping us to see with our mind's eye what the reality is through God. I'm going to look at two, and only two. The first one I'm looking at is, "Blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted." Now let's understand the depth of the meaning of what Jesus is talking about here. Jesus uses a word in Greek which talks about the absolute depth of pain and sorrow and mourning. It's like in Genesis chapter 37 when Jacob is told that his son Joseph has died. He stands up and he rips his clothes apart. He is so much in agony over the pain of the loss of his son. Understand this. I might stand up here and rip my shirt apart and go, "Oh my heavens." But all you're going to think about is there's buttons all over the place because I can get another shirt. I can go down right now and buy another shirt for a few dollars. But to do this back in that day there, well, you don't have another garment. This has got to be fixed. So it's a significant thing when they would do that. And it represents the depth of the pain that he is experiencing. I talked to a friend the other week, and I wanted to see how they were doing, and this is what they told me. "I can't get over it. I miss them so much. I don't know how I'm going to cope." That's the depth of pain. That's a passionate pain for somebody that we loved and cared for deeply. And this is the pain, the type of pain that Jesus is referring to deliberately. And he says, "Blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted." There are times in our life when we would honestly say, "I don't know how I'm ever going to move past this. I don't know how I'm going to get over this." But Jesus makes that promise to us. You will be comforted. You will be comforted. You think about Psalm 23 and apply that to the situation. And I was thinking about that just the other day. You're going through a turbulent time. There's a lot of things going on. Wouldn't you want to be sitting beside a quiet stream, just quietly listening to that, forgetting all else? Or lying in a green meadow and just looking at all of the beauty around you? In God, Jesus says, they will be comforted. Sorrow and pain. Here's a thought about that. We don't like to have to go through problems. We don't like to have to go through pain. The pain of loss, the sorrow that comes with it. But they can help us to learn. They can help us to learn. They can help us to see the caring of other people, how other people value and appreciate us. And they can help us to see how God will act and intervene in our lives. They can open the eyes of our heart. Let me share this. I read this the other day and I really liked it. This is what it says. I walked a mile with pleasure. He chattered all the way. but left me none the wiser for all he had to say. I walked a mile with sorrow, and ne'er a word she spoke. But oh, the things I learned from her when sorrow walked with me. There's an old Arabic statement. It goes like this. All sunshine makes a desert. We need pain. That's another paradox of life, isn't it? We don't want pain. We don't see how pain can help us or how we could benefit from it. But nonetheless, we need pain to help us to grow. And through pain and God, and I'll make this very clear, because through pain alone, no, but through pain and God, we have and we can have this inner confidence of the hope we have through God. See, problems make us aware of God's provision. Hagar was out in the desert, and she's looking around going, it's hopeless. And God opened her eyes in her pain and said, here is exactly what you need. Open the eyes of our heart that we may see God quietly working around in us. And then the second one, if you don't mind me taking a few more minutes, the second one, another paradox. Blessed are the meek, for they will inherit the earth. Now, does that make any sense to you? Humanly speaking, blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth. Let me give you the parable according to this world's interpretation. Blessed are the powerful, for they shall prevail over the weak. Isn't that the way it seems? So this is the paradox. Let me give you this illustration. I've used this individual before, but still, the illustration is very clear. During the Nazi time in World War II, they used their power to prevail over their enemies. Many people perished at the concentration camps. But one young Jewish psychologist held on to a purpose in life. He said, I've decided I need to write a book, and I'm going to survive because this is my purpose, this is my meaning. And it gave him meaning and purpose in this seemingly futile situation, in this very painful existence. And this hope and this meaning enabled this weak man to prevail over his powerful enemies. Do you get the point? Blessed are the meek, for they will inherit the earth. It seems like a paradox, but in God, you know, it happens all the time. Even when struggling is futile, here's another reminder, don't give up. There's an old aphorism. I read this word the other day. I had forgotten this one. Does anybody know what an aphorism is? If you don't worry about it. I'm going to forget it in the next few minutes too. It's an old saying. It's an old saying. It goes like this. No one catches the wild donkey by running after it. Yet, only those who run after the wild donkey will ever catch it. It's another paradox. You know what it's saying? Don't give up. Keep on believing in God no matter what. Keep on believing in God even though this world is telling you forget about it. He's not there. He's not going to help you. Don't give up. Keep on chasing the donkey. Because only those who run after the wild donkey will ever chase it. Don't give up. And again, that statement. The eyes of our heart set the direction of our lives. And we need to focus on developing our ability to see God working all around us. The sad reality is that most of us are as blind as bats when it comes to seeing God. And what makes it worse is when problems come up, and it makes us even blinder, and we start doubting all over again. And our minds become completely closed off to the reality of God. The pain of this world causes skepticism. Now, none of us here are skeptical when it comes to things of God, right? So what I want you to do then is just write this down and memorize it for the other person who is skeptical that you know. And then you can help them with this. But I want you to think about this. You see, pain can cause us to be skeptical. When we're going through pain and we see other people going through pain and we become skeptical and we say, well, who's there to help them? And then we look at God and we say, what are you doing, God? Fear causes skepticism as well too, doesn't it? Fear and anxiety causes skepticism. Fear and worry causes skepticism. Doubting causes skepticism. I have this old saying, we have this old saying, I won't believe it unless I see it. And Judy has a saying. Can I give this one, Judy? Seeing is believing, and even when I see it, I don't believe it anyways. And that kind of describes the Pharisees, the religious leaders of the time. Think about this for a minute. Jesus is walking among them, and he's doing what we call miracles, supernatural things. He's healing sick people. He is healing, bringing back dead people to life. He's making the blind to see. This one person's going around and doing this constantly, and right in front of them, too. He does it right in front of them sometimes, almost to seem like, okay, you guys just don't get it, do you? He does it in their own synagogue, and go, how dare you? But he does it right before them. And they see it, but they don't believe it. What's wrong with them? And he works this great supernatural miracle. You know one of the greatest supernatural miracles? He shows supernatural kindness and compassion continuously, even though they're trying to get him. And he says this about them. In Matthew chapter 13, he says, though seeing, they do not see. Though hearing, they do not hear or understand. That describes it right there. And actually, Isaiah spoke about them years ago. And if we read this in Isaiah chapter 6, verse 9, he says, you will be ever hearing, but never understanding. Actually, I understand that one completely. If somebody's trying to give me instructions, I go, what? What is that? And they try to clarify and they go, what did you mean? And then they try to give me more, and I go, I'm not getting this at all. Ever hearing, not understanding. I'm there. But he's talking about things with God. He's saying, you will be ever hearing and never understanding. You will be ever seeing, but never perceiving. For the people's hearts has become, and this is the key, calloused. They hardly hear with their ears, and they have closed their eyes. Otherwise, they might see with their eyes. Open the eyes of our heart. All sorts of things causes skepticism. Sometimes people look at it and they go, I don't want to be wrong. I don't want to be ridiculed. I don't want other people to think that I'm wrong or weak. And so I choose, therefore, to close my eyes, the eyes of my heart, and not believe. We shouldn't be too difficult on ourselves, and this happens to us pretty often. We have very good company. And I'll use the example of Thomas. Think about it. Thomas was with Jesus for 3 years. Thomas saw Jesus doing all sorts of miracles and great events. Thomas heard repeatedly the words of Jesus. Thomas heard the words that he was to be crucified, but he would rise again. And this is what happens with Thomas. In John chapter 20, verse 25, after the other disciples have come and said, we've seen Jesus, Thomas makes this statement. Now, but you have to understand the emotions behind it. He says, unless I see the nail marks in his hands, and put my finger where the nails were, and put my hand into his side, I will not believe. There's a lot of emotion there. He's feeling disappointment. And disappointment caused skepticism. But a week later, this is what happens. And it says in John chapter 20, verse 26. Hello? A week later, his disciples were in the house again. And Thomas was there with them. Though the doors were locked, Jesus came and stood among them and said, peace be with you. And I love this part. Then he turns to Thomas and he says, "Here, put your finger here. See my hands? Reach out your hand and then put it in my side." And then he says, "Stop that and believe." And Thomas says to him, "My Lord and my God." All doubting is gone. And in his heart later on, he's thinking, "Thank you, God, for being so gracious with me. You knew my heart, but you knew my doubts, and yet you ministered to me in just the way I needed." But then Jesus doesn't stop, and he says these words. He said, "Blessed are you, that because you have seen me, you have believed. Blessed are those who have not seen me, and yet believe." Did you hear that? You know who those words are meant for? Those words are meant for each and every one of us here. Blessed are you who have not seen me and yet have believed. Those words are for us today. Those words are comforting, and those words are reassuring, and those words, he's looking at us and saying, "You believe me, even though you don't see me. You're willing to, by faith, look beyond the facade of this world and see the reality of how I'm working for you and I am with you." By faith, you see this. God doesn't condemn us for doubting. He's always willing to be there and to open the eyes of our heart that we may see. Sometimes it's kind of like our brain just can't compute the reality of God. It's like we need to be rebooted. And sometimes, and I'm going to say that deliberately, we need to be booted. But sometimes the software needs to be updated. And how do we get this updated, this software? It's very simple. We go to God and we say, "Open the eyes of our heart." And we do this again and again and again so that we have this constant reminder that God is working in our midst. See, because God is always there and he's always working in our midst. Richard, and I'm going to say this because I love this name here, it's a French name, it's Richard Gilbert. Okay, that's how you would say it. Yeah, it's right up there, you would say Gilbert. He stated this, and I love this statement. Paradox is simply the truth of God standing on its head to get our attention. Do you get that now? Standing on its head to get our attention. God is doing all this stuff, and he's saying, "Just open your eyes, or ask me, and I'll help you believe." And then let God be God and do his work in our lives. Doubts rob us of joy. Doubts rob us of strength. Doubts keep us in the mourning. Doubts fill us with despair. But God, if we call out to him and say, "Open the eyes of our heart," he will do that. And he'll bring us hope. Romans chapter 15 and verse 13. "May the Lord of hope fill you with all joy and peace as you trust in him, so that you may overflow with hope by the power of the Holy Spirit." And I'll just share this in closing. From Psalm 23. "Even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will not be afraid, for I know you're with me.